Welcome to Szabo Cast. Here we discuss all things from a working class, trans, anarchist, analytical perspective. Due to the nature of this show, listener discretion is advised. My name is Skylar, my pronouns are she, they, they, and I'm your host. Thank you for joining us today.
The following segment deals with the topic of gun violence, white supremacy, police violence, racism, homophobia, transphobia, queerphobia. This one's a heavy one. Viewer discretion is advised. California is known for its gun control laws. Oftentimes, you will hear this mentioned by some right-wing loose cannon as an attempt to drum up support for the Second Amendment or to persuade his fellow inbreds to vote for his favorite cowboy mashed potatoes of a political candidate. But this opposition against gun control is not only reactionary, but it lacks any of the nuance required to truly engage with this conversation in the first place. I, as well as anybody for that matter, can understand and empathize with people who have trauma related to gun violence and might not be too keen on the idea of being against gun control. I can equally understand why somebody would oppose legislation relaxing gun control as well. It's a complicated issue, however. On the one hand, gun violence exists in all 50 states. Even in the state of California, where there was a recent murder of a queer business owner in Lake Arrowhead. Gun control did not save the life of Laura Carlton, a mother of 9 children. She was met with homophobic remarks before her death. And keep in mind, this is the death of a mother of 9 children. This is a flat-out homophobic hate crime in so-called liberal California. We in the LGBTQ community feel that pain deeply, and we need to remember it was the Republicans in California who introduced gun control bills back in 1967, backed by the National Rifle Association as well. You heard me right, this is absolutely not endorsed by the National Rifle Association, and frankly, they need to be abolished. If they cared about gun rights, they would have spoken up about the murder of Philando Castile. But I digress. The Mulford Act, which is this gun control bill that was introduced, was signed into law by former Governor Ronald Reagan, and it was specifically crafted as a means to disarm the Black Panther Party. This is because the Black Panthers were arming themselves while patrolling law enforcement, keeping the Oakland Police Department in check from using excessive force on black civilians. You know, cop watching is what we call it today. We'll talk more about that later, however. On the other hand, gun control primarily serves the interest of certain people. And believe me, it is not the victims of gun violence that they serve, but it is people with certain names and certain addresses. We need to remember the root of where gun violence stemmed from. People don't go on mass shootings out of nowhere in a vacuum. I was living right across the street from Saugus High School during the mass shooting that took place there on November 14th, 2019. 2 students were shot dead, and Nathaniel Burhow, the shooter in question, shot himself afterwards. It was his 16th birthday. Investigators found no evidence of a motive. No manifesto, no diary, no suicide note. He was, however, familiar with firearms and grew up with guns in his household. He was trained to use firearms since he was very young. I know some people will say, well, maybe he grew up in a bad neighborhood. Well, it depends on what you mean by bad in the term bad neighborhood. Because if you mean the ghetto, then Saugus is part of the greater Santa Clarita City. The median household income in Santa Clarita is about $117,000 rounding up a year, which is among the top 20% earning rate in the country. Needless to say, race is liberal. Saugus is much higher than the average median income for Americans being $31,000 per year on average. Yet Saugus High School was still on the receiving end of a conveniently inconclusive mass shooting that took the lives of 2 children. I've lived in Saugus for 8 years, very close to Saugus High School. In my time there, I rarely witnessed a person of color. Instead, I saw a lot of white people who routinely waved Blue Lives Matter flags. My neighbor during that shooting would wave a Trump flag on his roof, and he once told me that he knew the Saugus shooting was inevitable. He smiled right after that remark as well. So if you want to call Saugus a bad neighborhood, maybe define what a bad neighborhood is before you conclude with your unfounded liberal sophistry. Because it needs to be said that mass shootings tragically happen every day in the United States, sometimes multiple times a day. But what is often left out of the conversation is the shootings committed by law enforcement. Not only are police routinely given state permission to use firearms in any given location due to their authorization, but gun control laws in California do not apply to the police. I'll put a link in the description down below for more information about how gun control laws are exempted from law enforcement. But I think 2021 was an interesting year for law enforcement, and I think context is going to help us understand. According to the Los Angeles Times, LAPD shot 26 people in 2019, the same year as the Saugus High School shooting. That may seem like a lot because it actually is, but this was actually considered a historic low for the department out of a 30-year streak of shooting more than 100 people per year since the 1990s. However, 2020 saw a slight increase of 27 shootings with 7 killed. However, 2021 saw a dramatic increase of police shootings up to 37, 18 of them being fatal. Only 40% of the suspects killed in 2021 were armed, and most of them weren't even guns, but random objects like bike locks, vehicles, and sharp objects like broken bottles. Police weren't really hitting up mass shooters. Meanwhile, the same department saw an increase in police shootings between 2019 and 2021. Mass shootings actually decreased in that span of time. According to the Public Policy Institute of California, 2019 saw 51 shootings. 2020 saw a decline of 39, while 2021 actually saw only 46. Of course, just like the police shooting, both statistics saw an increase in fatal shootings, with the 2021 police shooting body count being only 18 of the 37 shot suspects. One might conclude that 46 mass shootings is far greater of a threat to society than the measly 18 fatal shootings. However, we need to keep in mind that the timeline in which these shootings take place in is a little bit more complicated than that. Remember that 40% of those shootings committed by law enforcement officers in Los Angeles were definitely not as a response to mass shooters at all. After all, you can't do a mass shooting with a bike lock unless you're a fucking mad scientist. If we do the math, averaging out the increase of both shootings from LAPD and mass shootings in 2021, we can see an increase in mass shootings ranking up to 18% in comparison to the mass shootings in 2020. And keep in mind, this is the entire state of California. It is also worth noting that there was a decrease in mass shootings because of the COVID-19 pandemic that took place in 2020. However, the number of LAPD fatal shootings in 2021 went up by 157%, and that's just the LAPD, not the entire state of California, just the LAPD. Which means that the Los Angeles Police Department are killing more civilians on average than mass shooters are in the entire state of California. It's needless to say that shootings are simply numbers in this analysis, but even one shooting shouldn't happen in the first place. Real lives are accounted for in these statistics, and it is in no way a means to say that mass shooters are more or less justified than law enforcement using excessive force. It is also not meant to downplay or diminish the severity of a loss of life. In fact, on the contrary, these numbers do, however, really shine a beaming light on the horrific example that occurred On December 23, 2021, when the year was just wrapping up, police were called to a Burlington store in North Hollywood for an unarmed suspect who was a homeless man. I'd say he was unarmed, but you gotta keep in mind that this was also taking into account that he also was reported to have a bike lock. So we're dealing with a man who does not have a gun and is still being called by law enforcement on assault charges. But instead of hitting the unarmed suspect, which in and of itself is already a ridiculously escalated, excessive use of force, the bullet hit a 14-year-old girl in a dressing room who was trying on dresses with her mother. Her name was Valentina Orellana Peralta, and she was working on gaining legal citizenship in the United States. Valentina was innocent of any wrongdoing, committed no crime, and yet she still lost her life in a 9-day streak of police officers killing innocent civilians that month alone. She never got to celebrate her quinceañera. She never got to gain legal citizenship in the United States, and I can imagine that her family did not have a Feliz Navidad. Or for you fucking white people, that means Merry Christmas in Spanish. Not to mention, body cam footage actually shows fellow officers telling Officer William Dorsley Jones Jr., who was wielding a rifle, pushing himself to the front of the pack, to slow down. Yeah, other officers were telling this fucking Call of Duty nerd to chill the fuck down. On February 9 of that following year, Mike Bonin with the city council all voted to get a request to report on this increase in shootings committed by LAPD. Bonin went on to say, it's important to note that none of those who died at the end of December were armed with guns. I think it needs to be said that gun control is meaningless in the grand scheme of things. Former New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern once said, Australia experienced a massacre and changed its laws. New Zealand has had its experience and changed its laws. I don't understand the United States. To be fair, Mrs. Ardern, can I call you that? I don't quite understand the United States either. I can absolutely say that the mainstream opposition to gun control is largely stemming from the right wing in the United States, who have infected lobbies in the gun industry. Within the capitalist system, there is a financial interest to save face in the gun manufacturing department, especially since the United States government alone spends so much money on policing and militarization and the imperial system that continues to infest the world today. There is an incentive to create a saving phase for weapons manufacturing, which means that the biggest fans of firearms, no matter who is armed or not, are the right wing. People who support the state and are violently reactionary. However, among the left wing, I think a lot of us are beginning to understand that gun control only seems to serve the interest of the rich because it disarms the working class and maintains a monopoly on violence in the hands of the police who protect that class interest. It is absolutely the reason why you are seeing so much funding going towards Cop City in the Atlanta forest, with routine arrests on people organizing bail funds and people who are resisting peacefully against the construction of Cop City, while the police continue to hire contract workers to routinely deforest the land. Mainly anarchists in Atlanta, Georgia are seeing the demolishment of entire ecosystem to build a training goal surveillance state. And you think they're building Cop City to prevent mass shootings? I don't fucking think so. But even with all this context put into effect here, I just don't think that there is an easy answer for any of the problems at stake here. Gun control has clearly not worked in California. I used to live in Van Nuys, by the way, more specifically on Bessemer Street. That Burlington coat store is near the border of North Hollywood and Van Nuys, very close to the Game Dudes store that I love so much. I used to drive by it all the time, although I wasn't living in Los Angeles during that incident. But you can imagine that being near two major shootings doesn't sit well with me, knowing that the police can't even get their shit together when it comes to shit like that. And keep in mind, gun control doesn't make the police more effective in preventing gun violence. Hell, according to the University of Utah of Law in a study conducted in 2020, police barely solve 2% of crime as it is. I look at ridiculous examples like Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, and I wonder if these people really think that increasing the police budget is really going to make the people safer. Now apply that framework to California's gun laws. And then I must ask, how the fuck are the police more legitimate to be militaristically armed in comparison to a bunch of Marxist black power organizers whose goal is to unite the working class? Clearly, this doesn't add up at all, and it is rather inconsistent with the goals of people who want to reduce gun violence. And I want to make it clear that this isn't meant to attack people who support gun control or are against gun violence. I think everybody is. All I'm doing here is attempting to get people to look at the bigger picture. With police maintaining a monopoly on violence, we see a drastic power imbalance that is not only killing innocent people before they can even stand in trial for a due process, but is in and of itself wildly ineffective for preventing the escalating rise of mass shootings we see in the United States in the first place. In the same city council meeting, Bonin went on to say, it's important for us to draw attention to this because this is about city employees. These are people we hire. These are people we train. These are people that we discipline. What this tells us is that the state is rather inadequate with preventing the death of the civilians it governs over. Some people may say that death is inevitable, especially with all that crime. Even if you believe that, crime didn't increase in 2021, but it actually went down. Police exist specifically to maintain crime in the first place. After all, the police are an industry. They are a so-called labor force that has a police union that has never been met with any Pinkertons before. Very liberal use of the word labor force, however. Because let's face it, police are not there to protect and serve the working class. They are there to protect and serve the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, the people who own the means of production. After all, I think one person stealing a pack of cigarettes is far less lethal than an extrajudicial murder. Wouldn't you say, Derek Chauvin? Property crime my ass. George Floyd was murdered for a pack of cigarettes and was never given a due process. Meanwhile, Minneapolis released a document indicating a long string of police excessive use of force for the past decade. Clearly, we need solutions. But I think we can agree that the solution is not founded in giving the state even more power and dominance. I have some advice for the liberal who supports gun control. Firstly, you need to understand that if you're going to engage in a conversation about firearms, you need to understand that a lot of people who commit these mass shootings acquire the guns legally. Of course, that isn't true for all cases, as the Saugus High School shooter assembled his firearms using different parts over time. But Valentina Oriana Peralta was committed by a dog of the state who was permitted to carry in the state of California. After all, gun control was introduced in the state of California to keep black people from protecting themselves from the police. And despite what your racist Republican uncle may say at the dinner table this Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner, they don't give a rat's ass about gun rights unless it is white people who are bearing arms. Gun control laws, as well as the Second Amendment, was founded strictly on the premises of white supremacy and colonial violence. And thus, if you're going to engage in the conversation about gun control, especially in the state of California, you need to think outside of the box. You need to think in revolutionary terms. And lastly, if you really want to stop mass shootings from happening, you need to target their ideology, their upcoming, where they get these ideas from. Because in the United States, and California is no exception here, people are being conditioned with the idea that some people are okay to be murdered. Yes, this does in fact very much so relate to the rise of fascism in the United States. It is an unavoidable subject and it is absolutely related here. People don't just wake up in the morning, think that they're gonna go on a mass shooting for the lulz. People have convictions of some sort. Even if the investigation is inconclusive by Santa Clarita Police Department, I refuse to accept that there was no motivation for the shooting committed by Nathaniel Burhow in a mainly Blue Lives Matter city. Give me a fucking break. Because at the beginning of this segment, I gave a brief summary of the homophobic murder of Laurel Carlton, a mother of 9 children. This homophobic murder is absolutely not an isolated incident, but part of a large string of homophobic, queerphobic, and transphobic attacks on various communities all throughout Southern California, particularly at elementary schools and school board meetings. We look at places like Satakoy Elementary School, where the hate group Leave Our Kids Alone are seen telling queer kids they should have died in the closet. You don't believe me? Here's a clip.
You should have hanged yourself, piece of shit. You should have died in the fucking closet. Fuck you.
These people have made their presence known not just in North Hollywood, but also in Glendale, Eagle Rock, Orange County, and Chino. Their biggest and most dangerous supporter is Sanja Shah, who is not only the Chino Valley Unified School District School Board President, but she also has several ties to lobbyists who want to make it legal for the state to extrajudicially murder LGBT students. She's also friends with the fucking Proud Boys. That's California. Liberal ass, progressive ass, probably fucking like every fucking right-winger's worst nightmares, California. Of course I'm being sarcastic because it is absolutely annoying how many people credit California for being so progressive when California is probably more right-wing than some red states, if I'm going to be real with ya. And Sanja Shah's ties to those specific people who want to make it legal to extrajudicially murder LGBT students and people, yeah, that's the same people whom you want to maintain and enforce gun control on the working class, rendering it impossible for LGBT people to even defend themselves when we're all getting rounded up and gassed on Project 2025. Oh shit, better not fucking tell you what Project 2025 is, or else your fucking heterosexual ass is gonna get traumatized. I wonder why Anne Frank's book was banned in the state of Texas. That doesn't make sense to me at all.